this is one of the biggest nights that we've had thus far, so it's good to see everyone. Welcome to our introduction to Buddhism and Shingon concepts. This is a new class that we are offering. It is one that I taught actually in Hawaii in 2012. So we are, after 8 years, coming back around full circle, and we're going to do it with a completely new audience and new perspectives, new minds, and new ideas, and definitely a new period in history. So as we go through this evening, if you have questions, please let me know, and I will do my best to answer them. Or as I always say, I will research and get back to you if I don't know. So I'm going to start tonight at the beginning, and that means with a discussion of the Four Noble Truths. So we, I think in the West, get a particular view of the Buddhist teaching, and that view is heavily influenced by translation and by texts that we're reading to some degree out of context. So I'm going to try to give a little bit more context to those ideas and answer questions that I had when I first started on my Buddhist journey. And of course, number one among those questions was, Buddhism seems pretty interesting, but gosh, it's pretty heavy with all this talk of suffering, and that can seem off-putting, daunting, and not something you want to be very interested in. So personally, when I became interested in Buddhist teaching, in fact, the word suffering was not off-putting. I was like, yes, I understand this concept. I see this around me, and it makes a lot of sense. However, as I got older, I thought, this doesn't seem exactly to mesh with the dialogues in the sutras and what the Buddha was trying to get at. And so I searched for a little bit more and better explanation. So to start at the beginning, I guess this isn't truly the beginning. It's more a quarter of the way through the story of the Buddha's enlightenment. But this was the first teaching of the Four Noble Truths. And the Buddha said that in life there is suffering. And oftentimes we get this translated as all life is suffering, or all life is beset by suffering, or something like this. And wow, that word suffering is really heavy. And it's problematic because I think it actually has the potential that if you are not suffering, to sort of force upon you the idea that you have to accept that you've been seeing things all wrong, your life is horrible, and otherwise you can't be a Buddhist. And that is not at all the case. So we'll talk a little bit about this word in Pali and Sanskrit, dukkha, which is often not totally accurately translated as suffering. And I'm looking, and I think this camera is crooked, so I apologize. Is that better? Yeah, I think that's better. I can't tell. On my side, it's like shifted. Sorry, you're gonna get seasick. I'm trying to get this straightened out. Okay. So what does it mean when we say, is that we have technical difficulties? So what does dukkha really mean? And I think there's a couple reasons why it's mistranslated. One, it's if you ever wrote a paper in school, you had to cite some source, and the unless you are already pretty far along in academia, you need to cite other people unless you're doing primary research yourself. Well, most people were not doing that research. most of the early translations regarding Buddhism were done by Christian missionaries, British explorers, colonial folks, and they were not completely focused on an accurate introduction of the Buddhist teaching to the Western world for the purpose of Westerners practicing Buddhism. They were often describing the differences between different religions, people that they came into contact with as a result of colonization, or with an interest to proselytize or convert. So if you're doing that, you're trying to draw distinctions, and you already have in mind, my current religion or philosophy is better than whatever I'm going to come into contact with. So let me construe these ideas in the light most favorable to my my own purpose, right? I want people to convert to my religion, so let me not do such a great job translating these other texts. So I think that's one area. The other is whomever did the first translation and chose the word in English to represent dukkha and chose suffering, that became repeated over and over. And that's not a really good explanation. So what does dukkha mean? Dukkha in Pali is made up of two words, the suffix du and the root word ka. And du is like the placement if something is off or it's not set well. So if you were to set something on a table, it's off kilter or imbalanced. It has that meaning or connotation. And ka refers to an opening. It could be a hole or a doorway or key, lock and key type idea. And it was specifically and often used with reference to a wagon wheel. So sometimes if you read Pali texts, we'll get this image of a wagon wheel where either the spokes or the axle of the wheel, when they come together, are not set together very well. So the wheel is crooked as you're going down the road, and it's squeaky for that reason. So when I was younger, I had an old car, and it always had a squeaky fan belt. And you start it up, and it was very embarrassing in high school. It was this loud squealing noise in the parking lot, and other guys had cool cars, and mine was not. In fact, I had a 3-cylinder car, not even 4 cylinders. And I'm from Detroit, so most people, the building shook when they started their cars because they had big muscle cars. So I don't think my car had any muscles in that comparison. So that fan belt squealing was embarrassing when you first start the car up. By the time you drove home, it was really getting on your nerves. And so this is more what the Buddha was talking about. He was describing the fundamental quality underlying our lives, which is annoyance, or maybe better put, rather than suffering, is dissatisfaction. There's a lot of times when we have in mind something we want to do, something we want to accomplish, an experience that we are interested in, and it doesn't quite go the way we want. It can be very simple. It could be we go for a job interview and we feel that we didn't get a question quite right. Or we think, oh, I should have said this instead of that. Well, that's not suffering, but it is dukkha. It is dissatisfaction. My old car with the squeaky fan belt was not suffering, but it was dukkha. It was not as satisfying a car as I wanted. So that had a lot to do both with the actual facts of things, as well as my expectations, and then my response to the situation. So this is what the Buddha was pointing out. And I think it's important to point out because, especially in the West, when we approach a spiritual system, we approach it with questions that come from being very steeped in a culture that is very Christian. And so we often are looking for comparisons to Christian ideas and other religions. So I'll give you an example. When I do any sort of public talk, or if I meet with the interfaith group, a question I often get is, well, what is your holy book? People say, okay, well, the Jews have the Torah and Christians have the Bible, and Muslims have the Quran. So what's your book? And I kind of laugh because I say, well, we don't have one book. We have like hundreds and thousands. There's no single book. But people assume that because it appears from their perspective that if you are a religion, you have a book, that all the religions must have a book. So we have these sort of, I think, cultural expectations or assumptions that come along. And this, as a starting teaching, might sound strange. Why is the Buddhist telling us about the essence of our existence, their fundamental existential problem that people face? And he's doing that because this is the thing that he's boiled it all down to, right? This is the root issue that really is bothering us in life. This is the thing that all the other stuff kind of, come issues out of, right? So what's the key point that we're focusing in life? And it's notable to say that he hit upon this dissatisfaction because he's leaving out a lot of other things. He's not saying that the fundamental issue for humanity is, a pleasant afterlife. That's not on the table. He's not saying that your fundamental issue is, some sort of very specific moral failing. He said, no, that's not the issue. He's not saying that you're somehow flawed from the moment you're born. None of these kind of things. He's saying you're alive, and throughout your life, you're going to experience dissatisfaction. And that dissatisfaction is going to cause a variety of emotional responses, and they become ever more complex. But if you really peel back the layers of the onion, so to speak, on all of these experiences, the root cause is dissatisfaction. If you think about it, and the Buddha did want us to think about it. He wanted us to test these things out. He wanted the monks to go off and meditate about it and kind of mull it over and say, is it true? Well, from the time you were a baby, you cried because you had dissatisfaction. You cried because you were hungry. You cried because you were cold. You cried because you wanted a hug. You cried because you were too tired and you didn't know how to put yourself to sleep. And you had dissatisfaction. And the more sophisticated in air quotes, the more complex we became, or we thought sophisticated, the more our dissatisfaction took new forms. So when I was 5, I was not dissatisfied about not having a car or having a car. I wasn't dissatisfied about whether the fan belt squeaked on the car. I was dissatisfied probably about a toy I didn't get, or a friend who didn't play with me, or actually I remember I was dissatisfied because my school didn't have a swimming pool and I wanted to go swimming more often. So this was my big dissatisfaction. But the older I got and the more sophisticated I became, my dissatisfactions became more complex. So it wasn't enough that I got a car. Then I pulled into the parking lot and I looked around and I'm like, oh, the other people have nicer cars or bigger cars or more powerful cars. So now I'm dissatisfied about that. So our levels of dissatisfaction grow, and the way our emotions spiral out with regard to those dissatisfactions also grow. So the Buddha was saying, no matter where we are, and I think this is a key point, if we're rich or poor, we have this sense of dissatisfaction. if we are tall or short, male or female, we're on northern hemisphere or southern hemisphere, we're, you know, in a lush tropical place that doesn't require us to do any work, we just pick fruit and eat it, or if we're on a desert island, right, we will find a reason to be dissatisfied. And it functions in much the same way as this squeaky wheel. The more it goes on, the longer it goes on, the more it sort of rubs on our nerves, and we get bigger and bigger reactions from us. And so eventually we write poems about our dissatisfaction, novels about, you know, mythical people's dissatisfaction. And we write, you know, we have, you know, very beautiful paintings about, you know, expressing our dissatisfaction. Right? Where would art be without dissatisfaction? So all of these things come out of us, and so we see these multiple layers of how it affects us. So the Buddha, though, was very specific in how it operates. So I think this is the other part that's missed in the teaching on dukkha, and I'll try not to say suffering. So the teaching on dukkha, he said there's a way out, and I'm going to show you how to fix it. So if you read a popular book on Buddhism, it's going to start along the lines of the Buddha taught all life is suffering, and, you know, there's this background thing. And they tend to leave out that the Buddha was very specific about how it operates and how to fix it. And I think that's really critical because it speaks both to his compassion, and also that this was not meant to be a defeatist statement. It wasn't meant to be a depressing or downer statement. It wasn't, you know, monks, all life is suffering, so drink up, you know, there's no hope. No, it was very much a, you know, if you just fine tune your mind, if you fine tune the way you see things, you can break through and see things differently. You can escape this dukkha, this dissatisfaction. The problem is not that the teaching is difficult. The obstacle is we've gone on for so long embracing the dissatisfaction, taking joy in the dissatisfaction, sometimes taking joy in other people's dissatisfaction, that even though something's very simple as a teaching, it is often hard for us to let go because that's all we know. It's become comfortable. And to reorient our minds, to reorient our thinking takes some effort. It's not impossible. With a little bit of practice, it starts to get easier, but it requires us to, here's the buzzword, be mindful, right? Have some awareness of when it's operating and then try to correct the mind. We do this naturally with the children and small animals, you know, don't touch that, you know, be careful, you know, we chase after them, but we don't do that with our own thinking. We don't do that with our minds. If you have a puppy, you know, you're watching all the time, you know, is it ready to go outside? Does it need to, you know, you take it out. So you try to find the signs, but we don't take the time to do that with our own mind because I think we're culturally, and just as human culture, we're acculturated to thinking that these things are normal. In fact, taking delight in these things. So when we are asked to change, it's quite a shock. It can be, you know, very difficult for us. So to make it easier, though, the Buddha said, "What's this cause? Where does this dukkha, this dissatisfaction, really arise? What's the real root cause of it?" And he said, "It's our craving, or in you know, the opposite side, loathing. So it's you want something and you don't get it, or you want to be apart from something. Like there's a group of people at high school that you really don't like and you don't want to be around them, and the teacher keeps sitting you next to them and you're just like, oh God, these people, you know, I hate their conversation, and, you know, all they talk about is stuff that I'm not interested in. And so we have, you know, this dissatisfaction arises because of the aversion to certain things. whatever TV show you don't like seems to be the one that's always on. The TV, well, I guess this doesn't work anymore because everything's streaming, so you can just watch it anytime. But my examples are too dated. I stopped watching television a long time ago, so forgive me if these are old. We want to go somewhere and we get stuck in traffic. So the things we want often are difficult to get, and then when we get them, they're not as satisfactory as we thought they would be. We are, you get the latest and greatest phone, you stand in line for, hours, and maybe you're the first in line and you get interviewed. Are you going to buy the latest and greatest shiny thing? Yeah, I'm going to get the shiny thing. And then 2 weeks later, you're like, oh, it's not that interesting anymore. And you're looking at the news for the new shiny thing. So that's our modern transformation of the process. But it happened in ancient times. It's going to happen in the future. I think in this way, this teaching is will stand the test of time. Whether we are, living on Mars or traveling through space, there will be dissatisfaction. And the Buddha was very clear that, I'm still crooked. This is so strange. The Buddha was very clear that everything experienced this dissatisfaction. Animals experience dissatisfaction. Humans experience dissatisfaction. He said it appears that those beings in the heavens experience dissatisfaction. And I thought that was the most interesting one because, culturally, popularly, we are told, live a good life, and after it's all over, things will be better, and everything in the heavens is great. And then I spent time reading, religious literature from a variety of cultures, and the gods still squabble, they still fight, they are envious and jealous of one another. It happens, everywhere. So the Buddha said, it appears to me this is really the root thing. Everyone has this experience, regardless of your body, or if it's made of flesh or if it's made of light. Right? This aspect of the mind, this is a universal thing. So the Buddha broke down this craving, right? This root cause of the dukkha, the dissatisfaction, and said it is a circumstance of our life, and it manifests in a variety of different ways, and it can be sort of categorized into 3 general kind of broad brushstroke categories of ways that it operates. And one is kind of a simple aversion or a mental or physical sense of something being unpleasant. And this can be things that we experience by virtue of, being in school. Teacher tells us we can't do something, our parents tell us we can't do something, society tells us we can't do something, and we react against it. It can also be the result of us setting up limits for ourselves. So thinking, well, I shouldn't do that, or I should do this. And then we get into certain spirals of thought around, whether things are right or wrong, or right for us or wrong for us. I think this falls into a lot of angst or anxiety will fall into that category. So that's one of the ways that we experience it. We also experience it as the mental activity of craving. We want things to be a certain way, and then we have big reactions when they don't go that way. So I use the example of a job interview and thinking about, how the job interview, I would have answered this question better, that question better. Right after college, I had a job interview, and I thought it would be a really great opportunity, but it was in a neighboring city, and I had nowhere to get there. There were no buses that ran, and I didn't have a car. So I borrowed a car from a friend, but it was what was the vernacular at the time? It was a hoopty, and so it didn't run very well. So it stopped about a mile from the interview site, and I tried to fix it. So I ended up with oil in my hands, and I was wearing a suit, and so I had to walk the last mile to the job interview. And of course, by this point, my anxiety was very high, and why did this happen to me? And anybody else would have been able to get here easily, and I'm going to go in with dirty hands, and I'm not going to get the job. And so my mental response to all of these experiences were a type of dukkha. I was, I had it in my mind, it should go a certain way. It didn't go that way, and I had the reaction. So the Buddha is explaining something that's very common for all of us. It's not a huge mystical experience. It's not a secret. It's not secret knowledge. It's something you can observe every day, all the time. The key is seeing it. So most of us don't see it. We're not aware of it. So he's teaching this, these Four Noble Truths, and they're noble because, these are really keys to unlock how we see things, how we experience things. But for someone laying it out, we probably wouldn't be very aware of it. So that's one type of dukkha, this response to our wants or our responses to our dislikes. So that's one. There's another type of dukkha that kind of comes about as a response to pleasant or unpleasant things. And so the Buddha said we want pleasant experiences and we want to stay away from unpleasant experiences. But we have this sense in the back of our mind that when we are having a pleasant experience, there's a little bit of disappointment going on because we think, oh, but this pleasant experience is going to end. It's fun now, but eventually it'll be over. And so we might, get kind of sullen. Or we have the opposite. We're having some unpleasant experience and we think this is never going to end, right? I'm never going to be free of this situation. And it's rare that we look back and say, oh, the unpleasant experience ended, and so now I'm happy. Or we don't necessarily in the midst of it say, well, all things are impermanent, therefore even this unpleasant experience will eventually pass. We tend to just dwell and we get very fixated on the pleasant or unpleasant. This is dukkha. I cannot get the camera straight. Every time I look, it's this way or that way. So these different ways of how we respond to these different types of input are dukkha. So how craving operates, how we respond to craving, all of these things are part of this operation of dukkha, this sense of dissatisfaction. I think the key is the Buddha was teaching us how to see things clearly. It wasn't a pronouncement. So this is what I mean, where I think sometimes we read the Buddhist teaching from a certain cultural perspective. It's not, your life is going to be horrible. That's not what he was saying. It's not a, this is never going to end, give up all hope. The fact that he points out dukkha must also be held in your hands with what followed, which was there is a specific process for loosening this sort of death grip we have on craving. And as we do that, we will alleviate the dukkha, right? This dukkha gets less. And it does work. You'll see, I think some people come by this naturally. Negative experiences happen to them and they seem to be very capable of laughing it off. Others of us, really struggle. So everyone's at a different place, starting point. But it operates in these, big reactions. It also operates in very small, barely perceptible ways. So it's something that, with meditation practice, you're looking at all the different areas of its operation so that you can get a hold of it. It operates with regard to, what we in the West would call subconscious thoughts. You wake up some mornings and you're anxious. You wake up other times and you're very calm. Certain thoughts sort of pop into your mind and may be bothersome. You may find yourself in a situation and it causes you discomfort and you're not really sure why. The Buddhist teaching would say there is a reason. We're just not really well connected to our thoughts enough to see the operation, right? See where the thought arose from. So there's always some, stimulus that gives rise to a certain type of thinking. And this is part of the practice of meditation, trying to really see that. Where did these things come from? To be more aware. And the process is not to stop thinking, right? So the sometimes, again, in the West, we think, okay, well, if the problem is craving, I won't crave anything. Sorry, but as long as you're alive, you will have cravings. Cravings are not the problem. It's your response to cravings, right? So if you like ice cream, have some ice cream. But we want to be able to go and, they say, well, we don't have your favorite flavor. And you're not like, oh, God, that's it. I'm never eating ice cream again, right? So sometimes we have these very big, unrealistic reactions. I use ice cream because it's, funny, hopefully, but we could have the exact opposite, in my example, I could say, okay, well, the car broke down. I have oil on my hands. The universe is telling me this job is not for me, or I'm never going to get a job. Actually, the opposite was true. I had a really good interview despite the oil on my hands. It ended up being a funny story. The person was like, wow, you must really want this job. You went through all of that work to come here. You could have just stopped when the car broke down. And I was thinking to myself, well, actually, I was so far away from home. This was closer than going back. So, but it's all about your outlook and perspective. But that takes some practice. That takes the ability to see those obstacles and try to, turn it around. I didn't get the job that day, but I got a really great recommendation as to what kind of work I should look for. And that advice ended up being the best advice I had. And I took the advice and actually got a job in that industry, and it was really good. So we shouldn't, these are not, they're not thou shalt nots. They are not, this is the word of the Buddha, accept it completely and there's no thinking about it. That's not how the Buddhist teaching works. It works based on taking the ideas, mulling them over, and asking, have I ever been dissatisfied? Yes. Right? I've yet to meet someone who's said no. Have I ever craved something and then not been able to get it? Of course. So these sometimes are very small things. I was looking for a nightlight yesterday, and I found a nightlight. I go, oh, I should buy another nightlight so I don't stub my toe in the dark. And this brand of nightlight is not sold anymore. So I'm looking on the internet. Oh, okay, it's not sold. So there's a tiny little bit of disappointment. Would I call that suffering? No, that is not suffering. But it is dukkha. It is a little bit of disappointment as a result of wanting something and not obtaining it. But the result on my mind, my psyche, is relatively small. However, it could be big. You could have then the next step in the mental process to say, oh, I never get anything. Every time I want something, I never get it. It's always that way. And then, it spirals into a type of deep sadness. That might sound ridiculous, but there's going to be some area of our life where that operates, whether it be some lifelong goal that we have. I have a friend, and they put on Facebook that they had finally gotten into art school. They're very happy, and they were going to move across country and go to art school. And the art is very wonderful, and they looked at this as an opportunity to finally sort of take their art to the next level and be professional. And then they posted, then they got the financial aid package and couldn't afford it. And, they were in a deep, deep depression. Their lifelong dream couldn't come true because of financial obstacle. And, they posted some very worrying things as a result, right? So they had a craving, they experienced dissatisfaction. The next step, as a result of that dissatisfaction, a lot of additional thoughts arose that caused them more dissatisfaction, more dukkha, more, maybe at that level they would have called it suffering. They stayed positive despite that, and lo and behold, financial aid package came through and they were able to attend. And to say that they were overjoyed is an understatement, right? So then it was happiness. So we can see the up and down, back and forth that happens with our mind all the time. And the Buddha said this up and down constantly is really the thing that is disturbing for us. It's really the thing that is eating away at us as human beings. And when we try to find happiness, when we try to find peace or joy, that's the thing that's still causing us to feel imbalanced. And I think it's true. The more I look around, whether people are incredibly rich and powerful, whether they're solidly middle class, whether if they're struggling, that doesn't matter as much as the underlying mental process. So this is really the heart of the Buddhist teaching. Everything revolves around this idea. We have a myriad of different methods to address this craving. All these different methods of observing the mind so that we see it. The mind itself is a tricky thing. It's a wily beast. It is, I think, perhaps Wile E. Coyote and Bugs Bunny were really a metaphor for us trying to understand our mind and catch on to our thoughts. That would not be too much of a stretch, I think. Our mind is trying to outsmart us a lot of times, the mental process. So we're trying to get a real hold on that. And the Buddhist sutras are fairly clear that a lot of the problems that we have, fear, anger, all of these things will melt away once we get a hold of these aspects of craving and our mental responses to them. But the Buddha had to start somewhere, right? He's had this enlightenment experience. He comes out of the forest. He finds his original 5 other ascetics that he was practicing with. And they ask, you're different. Something's changed. We can see it. And so he has to think, where do I start? Right? What have I realized that's different than all the other seekers ever? What is like the key, to this insight that I've gained? Where do I start in the explanation, right? Where do I start the story? So there I was on the side of the road and the car was broken down. Where do you start? And he starts with, the key insight, the thing that's completely different as a starting point for this path is this idea of dukkha, dissatisfaction. So this is the first step. And it's important, I think, to get a handle in the proper way of this first step, because if we conceive of it wrong, if we understand it through a cultural lens, that is steeped in other religious teaching, or if we have, our understanding is tainted by bad translation, which is sadly the case for a lot of Buddhist teachings, then we won't be conceiving of or putting the rest of the teaching into the right framework. So I can. There's a lot of Western Buddhists who misunderstand this concept, and that's also true for East Asian Buddhists. The word dukkha was translated into Chinese as ku, which is usually used as bitterness. So, it implies that life is going to be beset by bitterness. That's not exactly the right connotation. If we use this in that kind of word, a life of bitterness, you feel like, well, everything you grasp will somehow turn against you. That is possible, right? But it's not guaranteed. It's not a fundamental aspect or outlook. But we have to be very careful about the terms we choose. It's more that there's this potential, right? There's a potential based on how we view things to get it wrong and for it to result in sadness, disappointment, unhappiness that then fills our life with bitterness. But that's not how things are sort of fundamentally encoded or destined to be. So our first lesson in the introduction to Buddhism is a better understanding of dukkha. So I've been rattling on for a little while. So are there any questions about dukkha? I will sip my tea dramatically while I wait for questions. I'll give you another example of dukkha. So two years ago, I went to the Grand Canyon and I got this mug, Trails Forever, Grand Canyon Association. And I thought, oh, that's very sturdy. So I'm unlikely to break it. So this is a good mug. And then I was looking for the photos I took and I cannot find them. And I was like, oh, disappointment. But I thought instantly, oh, I have to go back. So any situation, right? It all depends on our response. We don't have to view things negatively. If we have more, we're on top of our thinking, we're more aware of a thought process, we can change our thoughts. We can invite joy, right? So dukkha obstructs joy because we don't see the process clearly. Okay, so there's a question in the chat. Oh, so Gabriella's question is, I will save this question because this is a topic for a whole other talk. So I will save that and add that to our conversation. That might be a little bit beyond one evening. So talking about the stages of mental development in meditation. I will say there are specific delineated stages outlined in the Buddhist teaching, including ways to ensure that your meditation practice is going in the right direction, having a good idea of what those look like when you are having fewer thoughts arise during meditation, and gaining that kind of insight. But that it might be better to talk about that with regard to actual practices. So when we talk about meditation practice, then it might be a little bit easier to put that in context. But that is a good question. I just copied and pasted it, so I will keep that as a future one. So Gabriella, thank you. I definitely want to cover that, but I don't want to do a disservice by glossing it. So the next question, how does one take insidious dukkha, like mental health issues, into the path? That, I get that question a lot, and I would say to be cautious, and here's where to be cautious. I think it's accurate to say that the Buddhist teaching is the earliest form of psychology that humanity developed, because it is still, I might, hopefully no one's a psychiatrist on here, I think it still outdoes Western psychiatry, psychology as a science of the mind. And the reason for that is a lot of Western psychology is looking at getting you to normal. So it's looking at pulling you back from an extreme and back to normal. The Buddhist philosophy and psychology teaching is saying what we think of as normal is functional for daily life, but there's so much more that the mind is capable of, can do, and if you work with it, it can take you other places. That said, true being down in the dumps or being sad is very different from clinical depression. Being anxious or angsty or these kind of things, having a tendency towards certain things, are also very different from diagnosed mental conditions. So I think we need to first take advice from both sides, but also be aware of our limitations. So as an example, I'm 6'2". After taking the advice in the job interview, I did get a job and I needed a car to get to work. And I remember distinctly going to a Toyota dealership, and the dealer was intent on putting me into a Toyota Corolla. I could not fit into the Toyota Corolla, no matter how much yoga or flexibility I did. It was not the right car for me. There was literally not enough space between the steering wheel and my knee to operate the pedals. So that was not a good match. So we do need to be aware that in our life, we may have certain limitations, and how do we work around those limitations? And when we have, actual mental illness or diagnosed conditions, we may need to work on those things first before doing certain spiritual practices. However, classically, this is why within Buddhist practice, there's a variety of different practices that are done. And so I think it's just a key of finding the right practice for us. Sometimes we need to lead the mind. Sometimes we need to distract the mind. Sometimes we need to practice through giving, work. There's a variety of different types of spiritual practice, all that can lead the mind. But we need to know what practice is skillful for us. Just like I needed to know driving a Toyota Corolla was not going to be skillful for my spinal alignment. So that would be a good one. The Japanese term for dukkha is also cool. So this is one of those areas that overlap in pronunciation between Chinese and Japanese. So I wonder if I can, I'm not sure the chat will accept. No, I can't. For some reason, the Zoom chat does not want hiragana and katakana. Yes, thank you. Naoko-san, thank you very much. Yeah. Thank you, Brandon. Yes, there we go. There's the kanji. I don't think I've set up Chinese and Japanese language on the computer yet, so I have to do that. But yes, they're the same pronunciation. Yeah, let's see. Yes, Michael, your question about how you respond. I think it is good to practice, um, even if you don't feel it. It is good. So inside, you may feel very dissatisfied with a person expressing dissatisfaction. Um, it is best, in many ways, not to express it because, and this is very, I guess, anti-American and anti-Western. We sometimes feel, well, we're being walked all over. We should be more concerned with when we give, um, when we let those emotions out, they lead to more emotions. So you never, very rarely do we have the conversation, wow, someone told me off today. And man, I really told him off. And then I punched him in the face and I feel great about it. That was the best day of my life. Okay, that's it. Normally, there's a lot more emotion and, you know, people are shaking and they relive it over and over and over again. So we're trying to avoid that. I think in the West, people struggle with seeing Buddhism as well, if I don't respond, then I'm being taken advantage of. Um, I wouldn't worry about, there's a difference between being taken advantage of and you can let people think whatever they want to think about you. That's not important. Um, and then there's a difference between, you know, being cheated. So you can stand up for yourself, but you don't always have to, you know, make a point of it or prove that you're right. I think that, especially in our society right now, is something that we've taken to an extreme with social media. Everyone has a platform. Everybody wants to be an expert. Everybody wants to be right, and they have a big response when they are told that they might be wrong. So this is not a, for example, I see a lot of bad information on social media. I don't try to correct everyone. There is no point. First of all, I would, my fingers would be bloody typing all the responses. I would just be typing all the time. And then you find ourselves like rage typing. No, you're, and you know, I'm gonna post these articles as if the other person is reading the articles we're posting. They don't. They just get more, and then it devolves into name calling, and so these things are not important. We need to, you know, I think part of mindfulness is sold as a wellness cure for all that ails you. Mindfulness really means you really need to be aware of all the things going on in your mind. It is a true challenge, and being able to choose your words and responses in a way that's useful and skillful takes a lot of practice and takes ongoing practice. It's not something that you get one day and then you just have it, unless you're enlightened. But for us, it's something that I'm working on all the time. So, but yes, it's better to respond with calm, even if the other person is wrong, because then you don't take home all the anxiety. The person who responds with calm isn't sitting there going, I shouldn't have been so calm. I definitely should have told that person off and I could have thrown a chair at them. You know, it's a much smaller. So you have to look at the response and the effect that it has on your own mental process. Yes, you know, I think this is a practice. So no one's going to get it right first off. No one's going to get, you know, I meditated for an hour yesterday, so now the next day everything is going to be great. No, if you yell at somebody, fly off the handle, someone cuts you off in traffic, and you, which finger is it? I don't know. You hold up your hand and just be aware. Like, oh, I did that. Okay, I did that. Next time I'll try not to do that. That's a practice. Practice means little by little. You know, it's called spiritual practice for a reason. We have to practice. It's called the practice of medicine for a reason. Medicine is always changing. We're watching that right now play out in our daily life. Scientists and doctors are learning about this virus every week. They learn something new, and it's a practice. The practice of law. We're seeing this play out in our national news. How will judges see things? How should we evaluate judges? It's a practice. Spiritual practice is something we're doing all the time. We're watching the mind, but the key here is it really does pay off in the calm and joy that we have in our life. Right? Things are chaotic. They always will be. We can't control everything, but we can try. We can gain more control over our reactions and responses. That gives us the calm that we need. That's something that can't be taken away from you. You're not going to get dissatisfied with your calm. Oh, I practice meditation and I gain this calm, but I'm not satisfied by it. No, it's the exact opposite, right? This is the thing the Buddha was trying to give us. You can take anywhere. If you get stopped at the border, they can't confiscate it. You still have it. You can carry it onto a plane legally. Your calm goes with you all the time. So your joy goes with you all the time. I'll talk more about that. How do we gain joy? These are all key components of Buddhist thinking and Buddhist practice. This is why, you don't see any Buddha statuary that's like sad or like super angry. No, they're always, like fiercely determined or very calm or very joyous. And that's for a reason. That's where the practice is taking you. So you see that reflected in art. Okay. I was going to try to keep this short. So we're reaching the hour mark. So I will dramatically take another sip of tea to see if there's any questions. So this is our introduction to Dukkha. I will have more to say about how Dukkha operates. It is important to have a good foundation because when you go on to look at the Eightfold Path and the other Noble Truths, understanding how it works. Yes? I beat Gabriella this time to the... So yes, we will be going into the Noble Eightfold Path and discuss it a little bit more. It often is just listed out. Here are these 8 things. I think it really does help to get a better understanding of them. I will also say, this is going to be we want to make a distinction in order to explain that there is no distinction. It's going to be an introduction to Buddhism and Shingon. Shingon is Buddhism. We are just Mahayana Buddhism. We have an advanced practice layer on top of Buddhism that's unique, but we're not teaching anything fundamentally different than our friends in the Zen temples and everywhere else. So it is just a method or an approach difference, but not a fundamental teaching difference. So our core texts are the same, the direction is the same. I think in terms of difference, we may just be, imagine you're in a art gallery and you've always viewed the painting from one direction, and someone says, well, look, if you walk around the back and look at it this way, or let's go up to the second level and look down on it, look at this shadow, how that's cast, and you have a new insight. I think the different schools of Buddhism are just this, right? We're just looking at the teaching from different directions, same teaching. So I will try to touch on things that are unique or you might see more often in Shingon practice or Shingon temples. But it is this, even though we have fewer temples, it's the same Buddhism. So, okay. Oh, thank you, Jamie. That's a great question. Do I have any recommendations for texts? If you're interested, and depending on your level, and people often chuckle when I say this, but The Idiot's Guide to Buddhism is actually very good. I have 12 copies at the temple. I use it for classes. Anyone who's been to Hangzhou will see them on the top of the stairs on the bookcase. Those are actually very good. Another good book is, I think, I don't have it handy. I will try to remember to have it handy so I can show it to you. There's a translation, The Life of the Buddha. Oh wait, I have the internet so I can look it up on. Hold on just a second. I'm not sure I can find it. It's a translation from the Pali, and for some reason I'm having a senior moment on the author, so I will try to look that up and recommend it. But there are a couple good books on the basics. I do think the Idiot's Guide or the Dummy's Guide is good. One reason, and the reason why we have about 12 copies is you can often find them online for $1 or $2 used copies. So I bought up a bunch of them years ago, and it's quite good. And there's a couple others that are actually still freely available. So what we may do, I have some of these books are past their copyright, and I do have some of them as PDFs. So we may, yes, anything written by Bhikshu Bodhi is wonderful. So that's also a good recommendation. But I may be able to post some of these on either a shared Google Drive or something like that, where people can talk about them, and who knows, we may have reading assignments and we can have book conversation. So we'll see. But I will try to, as I said, not keep you for so long. Okay, I get votes for that. All right, that would be good. So yes, I am also a big fan of, if you, as my teacher said, the Dharma is not for sale, but it does take money to print books. It also takes money to keep the lights on at the temple. So where the books are available for free, I have a tremendous number in PDF. I will try to search through and provide those to folks, because I was a poor college student for a long time, and I was very lucky to encounter Buddhist friends who loaned books, loaned lectures on tape. You can tell how long ago that was, because it was actually cassette tape. And those were wonderful resources, and I cherish many of them. So you don't have to break the bank to do this. So, but with that, I will let everyone get to dinner or whatever they have going on this evening. I know some of us are not all in the same time zone, so I want to respect. I know I see some friends from the East Coast, so I don't want to keep you on too long. We will continue the introductory class, and yes, that's actually a good point too. I will write that down. Kind of some comparisons between Shingon and Tibetan Buddhism. I know that question comes up often, so we'll try to cover that also. So I'll add that to my topics. But thank you for joining us. We will try to upload this also so that people can refer back or give it to friends. I know some people weren't able to join us tonight, but thank you everyone for joining us. 26 people online. That is a wonderful start. So I appreciate your interest and enthusiasm, and we will try to keep this and our other offerings going. So please stay safe, everybody. There's a lot going on in the world. Take care of yourself, take care of your friends and family, and we will see you again soon. Thank you.